everyone, and welcome to another edition of Folk Law. This is the program making the arts, culture, civic affairs, and of course the law accessible to everyday folk here in the San Francisco Bay Area and throughout the nation. I'm your host, Daniel Everett, attorney at law, and with me here today to discuss The Green Room, which is a new comedy series about co-workers and weed as they come together in an LA dispensary. The Green Room. And this is Liz Henderson here on Folklaw. Ms. Henderson, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Well, I can't think of a more pertinent topic than, well, especially in its legal sense, than one's ability to work at a marijuana dispensary here in California. Certainly an edgy issue in and of itself. I know you guys are trying to put together this series with all of these talented actors, but maybe first you could tell our audience why you chose this specific subject area.
Well, we live in California, Los Angeles, where we can legally go into a dispensary and legally purchase medical marijuana. When we go other places, we're originally from New York, and when we go back to New York and we tell people this, they're astounded. They ask us a million questions. What do you mean? What do you mean? How does it work? Do you get a menu? I mean, can you just choose anything? Is there 2 things? Is there 100 things? You know? And they just have so many questions. So we're like, oh, people just don't know. And so this is something that's very familiar to us, but to a lot of people outside of here where it's not legal, they're not. So this is something we just wanted to bring awareness to.
You know, it's funny. It's one of those things where people always talk about states' rights, but at some point, if things get so varied from state to state, it's almost like you're going to a completely different culture or subculture.
Exactly, yes.
So obviously, back east, it's not as acceptable to work at a dispensary. Give us the plot line a little bit here. How do you set this the Green Room series up?
So it basically takes place at a Hollywood medical marijuana dispensary, and it's our main character, Patrick Jason, comes from the Midwest, and he comes out here to be a bioengineer, but turns out that he just can't get the job he's looking for, and the only place that'll allow him to touch plants is a dispensary. And he comes in, and he's green, for, better terms. He just knows nothing about cannabis or medical marijuana. So we see through his eyes sort of him coming in for the first time and just being around these characters and this sort of culture that he's not used to. And he just has all these crazy characters around him, and he sees, every day you'll see the life of different people coming in. What we want to do is show people that it's not just your typical stoners that you see in stoner movies, but it's parents, it's teachers, it's lawyers, it's doctors. There's all kinds of people going in for medical marijuana for whatever reason. And that's sort of what we want to get across. There's a huge stigma in this country, and we sort of want to break that using comedy, sort of education through comedy.
Education through comedy. Well, let me just... It's really 2 worlds coming together there, because originally I'm from the Pacific Northwest, and even now here living in San Francisco, you mentioned a different, perception of people who live back east, but as far as, you get a little bit north, as far as Hollywood, even when you say the term Hollywood, it brings up a lot of cliches and stereotypes. So yep. I'm wondering how you deal with those two aspects of it, the marijuana and then the sort of the cliche nature of how the United States at large views Hollywood.
Right. Well, as our perception and a lot of other people's perception is that Hollywood in movies is glamorous.
Yes.
And it's not. It's very dirty. We call it dirty Hollywood. And we're actually going to represent that in our show. We're going to show the real Hollywood. We're going to show the grit and the grime and the homeless and what it's really like here. So it's a little more real. We're not going to glam it up. We're going to show the realness and how kind of dirty it is here.
Well, that being said, God bless. I had a friend not too long ago who actually went into AA in Hollywood, and she was telling me what would normally be a typical AA story of a back of a bar and tons of cigarettes and nicotine and people in recovery. But in her version, because it was in Hollywood, there's actually famous people who are in AA, and I don't mean to joke about that aspect of it, but it just sort of, again, it's a convergence of two things that I guess the comedic lines are almost built in there. I mean, if Mick Jagger or something is introducing himself to the group, and I don't know, that in and of itself has some sort of comedic element, to me at least.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what we find funny, too, and how we're going to position that into our show.
Well, what about, have you gotten any feedback? You mentioned that it's something that everybody does, and you could sort of break down the stereotypes to, I guess, make it more digestible and understandable to people. But there are some negative stereotypes out there, too, and one of them I would assume you would deal with is that as far as the medical part, for a lot of people, that's a hoax. It's just, a back pain that doesn't really exist, or anxiety.
Right.
Do you deal with that?
Absolutely, yes. There are clients that come in to the dispensaries and have real-life issues. They have Alzheimer's, they have cancer, they have AIDS. And, through our show, through comedy, through our actors, we show that actually medical marijuana is a great pain reliever instead of taking over-the-counter pills or going to a doctor and dealing with big pharmaceutical companies who just want money. Medical marijuana or cannabis is a natural plant. It's, nature's medicine. And a lot of people don't understand that. They don't get that. And that's one of the things we want to bring across is that it actually does help a lot of people. A lot of people.
So is this like a, I grew up watching I was a lonely child, just about every sitcom known to man growing up. And, all of them sort of had a backdrop, whether it be The Love Boat or Friends at a coffee shop or Cheers at a bar. Is it like that? Is the storyline really more about these friends and how they interact with one another, or is it about the medical marijuana?
So we would say it's basically like Friends in a medical marijuana dispensary. So it's about this group of, people coming together and working in a dispensary and dealing with all different sorts of people. But at the same time, what they're talking about is, how it can help people and sort of educating Patrick, who's our main star.
The green
educating
guy.
him. Yeah, exactly. Educating him on actually how it does help people. And we show that in the show. He'll actually see... he changes his mind throughout the show. He goes in, doesn't believe it. He's like everybody else who thinks it's a stigma, it's a bad thing. It's what, kids do behind buildings and under bleachers. But he actually sees clients come in that need it, who have, ailments that it can help them. And so it is like a friend, but it's also, our dialogue is smart and it's educational at the same time.
Now, wait a second.
But not
wait a
so
second.
much.
You don't lose your comedic hook after he accepts it, do you? I mean, I feel like with every show there's that tension that drives the comedy.
Right. No, and it doesn't happen for a very long time. But no, we don't lose that after that. He just sort of has an enlightenment, episode where he's like, he sees it firsthand. He sees how it actually helps somebody.